And that's where I met Rob. Wandered into the library one day, started talking to me about jazz. My first thought was, who is this guy? And I'm going to be honest with you, I thought, this guy's a little pushy. Kind of getting in my space a little bit here. So I don't know, it's a little unkempt. And I thought, who is this guy? Well, after a while, several conversations, I got to know who that guy was. And despite having been in professional jazz radio for over 20 years, I learned a lot from that guy. I went back and I listened to albums that I thought I knew, and I heard them again after I talked to Robert about them. And I heard them differently. My ears got bigger because I knew him. We're going to talk a lot today about the jazz lover that he was and the champion that he was for our San Diego jazz scene. But I want to take a minute and acknowledge another extremely important part of Robert that some of you may or may not have known. City College has a radio television program. And many years ago, we decided we were going to start this new show with students. And it was all going to be student done, recorded, edited, put together. Robert took that class. After he took that class, he almost immediately became a tutor. And I would run into him in the City College buildings all hours of the day and night. He would work on weekends if that's when students were available. And I can tell you, there are many people who came through that program who owe a debt of gratitude to Robert Bush for helping them get their degree. He was patient, he was intelligent, and he never let anybody get away with anything. And I really appreciated that for him, so I think it's important to remember him among other labels that we can put on him as a teacher. And he taught both in the classroom and out of the classroom. And a lot of life lessons came through him. I had some deep conversations with Robert that were not about music. And I will treasure those conversations and that growth that he helped me go through in my spirit. I'd like to especially welcome Robert's family today. They were his most treasured thing, even more than the John Coltrane LPs. His brother Mark and Mark's wife Julie, thank you for being here. His sister Suzanne and her husband Larry, welcome. They, I should note, they came all the way from Italy to be here with us and celebrate Robert, so thank you for that. I want to say a special thank you to Robert's daughter Natalie and his granddaughter Alyssa, who came from Houston, Texas. His nephew Joey Schaefer, his niece and grandniece Amy and Maya Bobo, and his nephew Dennis Bobo, and his father Ron Bobo. Welcome to all of you, and we are all privileged and grateful to have shared your Robert. He meant more to that family than any of us could ever know. But we, today, his extended jazz family, were gathering together with you to express how much he was loved and respected. We're going to have words and music throughout the day to let you know how appreciated he was here in San Diego and around the world. Mark, his brother, has invited some of Robert's closest friends to honor him musically today with their gifts and their talents. So we would like to begin this heartfelt tribute with one of his absolute dear friends. Please welcome the incomparable Joshua White. Joshua, beautiful, as always. Another close friend of Robert's and one of the city's longest running jazz concert presenters, a man who is invaluable to our jazz scene here in San Diego, and that's Daniel Atkinson. Dan is the program coordinator for the Atheneum Music and Arts Library, and I want to thank them for graciously donating the space today for us to have this remembrance. Dan is a Jazz Journalists Association's jazz hero. That's a big deal here in the world of jazz. He was nominated by Robert. So he's going to share a little bit more about the meaning of that, what it means to be a jazz hero, what that award means, and why it's so important to the jazz community worldwide. He's also going to speak about what Robert meant to our community here, but also his impact around the world. Dan?
So, Joshua, man, love a beautiful, beautiful performance. Coincidentally, not so many months ago, I was hanging out with Robert, which was something I love to do. And he wowed me again with his knowledge and his passion for the music, and mentioned that that piece, Smile by Charlie Chaplin, was written in a studio on Hollywood Boulevard that later became Herb Alpert's A&M Records studio. So same space, different music, but the same world. So, you know, what can I say? Robert knew more than I think any of us, certainly most of us, about this music. But it wasn't only his knowledge, it was his passion and his devotion to the people who make this music, to the people who make the music possible. And so it's a great honor to be able to host this event here to honor him. I think for our city, he's probably the only person who wrote reviews of jazz events for maybe the last 15 years. So there's just an incredible history of what's happened in this music in this town that we owe to him. It's still there, it's going to be on the website, I know. And that's kind of how I got to know him. He was a presence at my concerts for a lot of years, maybe 30 years, he said. But around 15 years ago, he came up and started talking to me, and we just became fast friends, and he was always welcome. It was always a blast to hear what he thought of things. You know, even if they were bad, it was fun to hear. But going back to the Jazz Hero thing, I want to mention that I think all of San Diego jazz heroes are here in the room today, which is also a testament to Robert. Gilbert Castellanos, who's going to play later, Holly Hoffman, who will also play, and Lou Valenzuela, who's documenting this, streaming it on the web. And all of us have been chosen through this process over the years. The Jazz Journalists Association is a national association. It's even international in scope. And each year they reach out to different cities and say, who's important to your scene? Who's making things happen in this town? And so it's something that's both local and national, because someone like Robert would put a name forward, and the people at the national board would say, so tell me why. You know, who is this person? Why does this person matter? And so I was incredibly honored to be honored, especially as a non-musician, primarily as someone who puts concerts together. That's kind of a behind-the-scenes role. And so when we heard about Robert's situation back in the middle of last year, both Arlene Damasco and I had the same idea. We need to reach out to the Jazz Journalists Association and see if they will honor Robert. And fortunately, we had the opportunity to present a certificate of honor to him from the Jazz Journalists Association at a wonderful event back in June, I think it was, at Tio Leo's. Pardon me. I had a hard time reading this back in June. I'm going to have a hard time again. So, please forgive me for that, but it's just, you know, a measure of how much I respected and loved Robert that I want to read this to you. This is from Howard Mandel. He's the president of the JJA. He's a great jazz writer based in Chicago. And this gives you an idea of how people outside of our area viewed Robert and knew about him. So here's Howard's words. The Jazz Journalists Association is pleased to confer upon Robert Bush a certificate of appreciation for writing supportive of jazz. Although he proudly described himself as a jazz snob, Robert, through his music-related efforts, has proved to be something else entirely. Far from being a persnickety elitist, he has worked as an advocate whose open ears and mind, clarity of description and analysis enlightens readers of every level of experience and expertise about qualities of music that deepen their pleasure and understanding. Robert's inclusive taste and ongoing enthusiasm for new sounds exemplify the best qualities of music journalism. The sincerity and depth of his devotion is evident in his articles for platforms including All About Jazz and publications such as the New York City Jazz Record, Just Jazz Guitar Magazine, San Diego Troubadour, San Diego Reader, NBC San Diego, and San Diego City Beat. The JJA has happily published Robert's profiles of San Diego's jazz heroes, and this is so true. He is one himself. He is a hero. In a post on his blog, The World According to Rob, he states, getting exposed to jazz was the single most important experience in my life. But it didn't come instantly or easily. The JJA, as well as Robert's friends in San Diego and his readers worldwide, are glad he discovered jazz and grateful he stuck with it. With admiration for his sensitive ears and inquisitive spirit, the Jazz Journalists Association hails Robert Bush. Thanks to him for listening and putting what he has heard into words. Just a beautiful letter from Howard Mandel. I just want to finish by saying Robert honored me again. What was it, back in August? He made me the subject of one of his last pieces, beautiful profile for San Diego Troubadour. So here's to you, my friend. Thank you.
How's everyone doing? I'll keep it brief. The first time I met Robert Bush was at a KSTS event. It was Jazz Live, and it was a group that featured Louis Hayes. Rob Thorson was on that gig, along with Mikan, I believe, on piano, and Louis Hayes on drums, of course. And that was the night that I met Robert Bush. He was backstage. And from that moment on, we became friends. He would come over, we would listen to records. And when I was at the Westgate, he would come out pretty much every Friday, and he would say how he heard it. So if it sounded great, he would let us know. And if I was having a rough night, he would let me know. But this is for Robert Bush.
Thomas is also a Jazz Journalist Association jazz hero, so we have a bunch of them in the house. I also want to say thank you to Gilbert, not only for this wonderful remembrance of our friend Robert. That tune, by the way, was one that he and I talked about at length, a tune that got both of us, as we said, in the solar plexus every time we heard it. So thank you for that, and thank you, Gilbert, for everything. And thank you, Dan, for everything that you do for the jazz scene here in San Diego and giving us something good to write about. Next, we have coming up our friends, bassist Rob Thorson, along with one of the greatest jazz flute players in the world, Holly Hoffman. She, by the way, is also a jazz hero in the Jazz Journalist Association. It's kind of like royalty if you're a jazz king. Okay? We're all kind of bowing down in the best way. They will be joined by drummer Duncan Moore, performing Mojave by Antonio Carlos Jobim.
I'd like to thank everybody for being here. Robert had a profound effect on the San Diego music scene, and I think all of us individually affected us in different ways. But it was such a pleasure knowing him, and I mean, when I first met him, I remember just being like, wow, this guy's kind of intense or a little rough or something. But then you talk to him, and I was like, this guy's a genius. He knows so much. He cares so much about the music, his passion and everything. And other people have alluded to how deeply he cared about the music. But the thing I also found out about him really quickly was how important like family was to him. Like he always, like every time he talked about his mom or his daughter, everybody in his family, it was really, really meaningful to him. And I just thought, you know, that's so important. He was so grounded that way. And he just had, it was, you know, it was funny, he'd show up at a gig and it always made me like a little nervous. It was kind of like, oh, Herbie Hancock just walked into the room. He was so knowledgeable, but he was really loving and honest, which I think is so important. And the funny little thing I was just thinking, it's kind of a Groundhog Day thing about Robert, was he had this old truck, I forget, it was like a Toyota or something. It was always pretty messy. I always wanted to clean it, but I knew he would kill me if I did that. But he would call me every like 3 or 4 months and be like, man, I can't drive, I gotta get to this gig. And it's like, well, is your truck broken? He's like, yeah, it doesn't work right. And I'd be like, yeah, I'll come by and check it out, because I'm kind of good with cars and stuff. And I'd go over, we'd get out of the garage, which is kind of precarious, and I'd drive it, everything was fine. And then I'd tell him, it's fine, everything's okay. And it was an old truck, but it was okay. And then he's like, oh man, thank you. And then nothing would happen. And then like 4 months later, he'd be like, man, I don't think something's wrong with my truck. So it's totally like Bill Murray Groundhog Day. Robert, it happened like 4 or 5 times, but I just thought it was really cute. But he definitely made a huge impact on my life and everybody that was here, and internationally as well. So thank you very much for being here. We're going to do Mojave. We've got a little quick interlude right before that, a tune I wrote called Disarray. Yeah.
I just found out today that I was gonna say one thing, but, and I don't have anything prepared, but I will say this about Robert. Well, two things, actually. One is that I've never seen anybody in the hospital knowing pretty well that this might be the last of his wonderful life on the planet. But so brave and so uplifted by reading jazz books and talking to my husband, Mike Wofford, about the good old days of jazz. And the other thing is, Mike and I always noticed that when Robert wrote a review or wrote an article about us, he nailed what we wanted to project to our audience, instead of many, many people who reviewed over the years, and I wondered what they were listening to. Robert always gave the utmost respect for really what we were trying to say. In all genres, by the way, from very modern jazz to very old jazz to trad jazz to every type of jazz there is, and not, I mean, some classical performances too. So, here's to you, Robert.
Something Holly just said I want to comment on. I was thinking about this earlier today, about Robert as a writer, and I never thought of him as a jazz critic when I read his pieces. He wrote in such a way that if you couldn't make it to that show, you got to go to that show anyway. Yeah. And he also had an incredible ability to take this complex music, these brilliant performers, and speak about that in a way that even if you had no idea who Duke Ellington or John Coltrane was, You understood, you experienced that concert. He made you want to know more about it. And his writing was always, we've heard this word multiple times today, always uplifting. Always good to read something, especially, as I said, if you couldn't make it to the show and you wanted to know what really went on, you could read Robert's piece. So thank you, Holly, for noting that and bringing that to the fore, because he really had a great knack for that, for the accessibility. Anybody could read about jazz and understand what was going on, because he was able to build that bridge for us. Jonathan Bewley is the Executive Director of Snapshots Foundation, and last year he spent a few hours with Robert, captured their insightful and interesting conversation about music and life. The depth of Robert's jazz and music knowledge truly was vast. His perspectives, his wisdom are and will always be deeply missed. And I think we all agree that he probably had a lot more to contribute. When I spoke with him toward the end of his life, he talked about a couple of priorities. And while it wasn't the first priority, high up on his list was finishing some pieces that he was working on, and he wanted to make sure he got those done. I think we can also agree that nobody heard jazz quite like Robert and shared his ears with us. Jonathan's going to be sharing some nuggets from that time when he and Robert spoke, and some more information about when the full interview will be shared with the public. Jonathan?
Hi, everyone. I was not looking forward to doing this, I think for reasons you will understand. But I'm so pleased to share that we have probably the only long-form interview that Robert gave on film. And that happened because it was actually 2018, which I call a year of possibilities. Somehow Robert stuck out. He was the guy who was at every show with his notepad and just grooving to the music, and he was an older generation too. I want to sort of like reference that too. It was an opportunity for me to collaborate with Robert. We sorted out all the Q&A, and basically what it is a portrait of Robert's life here in San Diego, and then the people he admired and knew, and also venues too. So it's kind of like a really rich potpourri, but it's not, I want to say too that Robert always kept it real. And speaking of that, he kept on saying in the interview, I picked up on this, it's real, it's real. And I think that's a great thing to know in life, when something is real and genuine, whether it's nonsense. And Robert always was able to, he used that phrase, it's real, it's real. So he kept it real, and it's a 72-minute piece, and I wanted to make sure there was not really much trimmed out. So that'll be published next month, and if you'd like to share it on Facebook and all that. I think it's going to be a continuation of Robert's legacy as well. And I was thinking about his daughters too, who we mentioned, who love so much. So it's, I don't know what to say. It was just a roll of the dice. Just for briefly, I've always interviewed musicians, so this is the first interview where it's like kind of bringing it back home for someone who's part of the glue of our community, and I'm so proud to have spent this time. So thank you, Robert, and thank you to all of you, and I guess we'll be watching a little sample of it here.
times gets a bad rap because there's so much to do here, that people think that, oh yeah, you don't have the makings of a serious arts community, but the arts community here is very serious. It can always get better. There could be more venues, but what I found as a witness over the last 40 years is that the musicians find a way to survive. And that's just one of the really super beautiful things about this is seeing a Mark Dresser get that gig at UCSD is, that's wonderful, because Mark has paid his dues. And, or seeing the things that Gilbert does with those kids, that's really beautiful, that's another example of someone who paid his dues and is all about giving back to the community. So there is a community here, I see these people constantly, and it's real. When Joshua White came in to Focus, it really sort of gave me this great sense of optimism for the future, because I was probably a little jaded at that point and thinking maybe that the best days were behind us. Seeing him develop, it just filled me with this great sense of hope, because I just feel that somebody that's that talented, has got to say something positive about the future. And then when I think about it, I think on the other end of the spectrum, my oldest relationship in San Diego music is with Peter Sprague. I saw him when he first came back from studying with Madame Sherloff at the New England Conservatory. Literally within a couple of months of him coming back, I saw him and I was just mind-boggled. And I can, consistently say that over the last 40 years, he continues to send me these recordings. They're just amazing, and I think, how lucky we are as a community to have this guy in our midst, but in terms of the music itself, and I think that's what everyone who's really in love with something is more concerned with. I'm more concerned with the kind of world that will exist after I'm out of here, So I believe, because of the incredible things that have come before, that's what's so exciting about what Gilbert is doing with the Young Lions, because he's creating this lineage of people who are carrying this tradition forward. You can't help but be optimistic about that. So that's it in a nutshell. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Good to see him and hear his voice. Be sure to follow the Snapshots Foundation, and then you can know exactly when that full interview is going to be released. Also, you can get information at the Remembrance Table out here in the courtyard. And now Peter Sprague, that longtime jazz friend of Robert's, longtime jazz friend of anyone in San Diego who loves jazz. He is not only a very close friend of Robert's, but he's like one of the coolest dudes in jazz music, right? And imagine if Wes Montgomery could surf. He's our surfer dude, he's our peaceful soul, he's our kind heart. He is also the gentleman who runs Spragueland Recording Studios. And in honor of Robert today, he's going to be performing Wise One by John Coltrane. And as we listen to that, we're going to enjoy a video montage that Robert's granddaughter, Alyssa Jordan, has put together for us.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks. It was really neat to hear Robert say those things. I feel so honored to hear that. I first met Robert. He took some guitar lessons from me. He was super passionate. He loved music, and he also was gruff. I'm kind of a soft-spoken. Well, I don't know if soft-spoken is, but I kind of keep it mellow. And he had a lot of energy going there. And there was a funny thing that happened. I had a house that needed some construction, and I don't know if you knew this about him. I didn't, but he did construction. So we kind of did some trading of lessons for construction. And what he had to execute was some finished carpentry, and there was an architect involved that had kind of wacky concepts and things, twists and turns in the angles of the construction. And I don't know if you know about that, but every time you get something that's not square, it's a challenge. And Robert was pissed. I thought, wow, this guy. But he did it. The place got finished. It was great. Years passed, and then I was doing a concert, I think, at San Diego State, and he was taking that class, or he was tutoring that class, and I got to reunite with him, and I saw some of his jazz writing, and I was knocked out. I thought, this gruff cat has it going on. I was just knocked out. I'm so happy that he found writing, because that seemed like that was his real calling and his gift, and he was so good at it. I loved reading his stuff. We talked a lot about John Coltrane, and I'm a big fan. Here's Wise One.
Thank you, gentlemen, that was beautiful, of course. The next part of our program touches my heart very deeply. And that is because this is the time that we are fortunate enough to hear from Robert's family. Talked to Robert a lot about life. Our conversations went far beyond music. And as I got through that gruff exterior, and I learned to know that man, I realized that one of the things he and I had in common is that there is nothing in this world, no sound, no visual, nothing, that means more to us than our families. And Robert talked with me so much about how proud he was of his family, the people that he grew up with. And mostly, he talked to me a lot about his daughter Natalie, and how much she meant to him, and how much he learned about being a person from being her father. Growing, making mistakes, getting things right, but never failing to be there, never failing to love. And I admire that about him more than any piece he ever published. If you followed him on Facebook, you have an idea of how much his family meant to him and how much his daughter and granddaughter meant to him. Would you like to speak, Natalie? Please welcome Robert's daughter, Natalie George.
I have my daughter here with me too for emotional support. I'm going to try to speak. My dad, as everyone here knows, was an absolutely brilliant wordsmith. Incredibly intelligent. If you ever spoke with him about history, politics, the state of the world, you know how insightful he was. A skilled writer with an encyclopedia of knowledge. Most of you know him as this pillar of the jazz scene here, which he undoubtedly was. But to me, he was my dad. Music was obviously very much a staple of my childhood. It had such an influence on me that at 3 or 4 years old, I knew who John Coltrane was. I called him Con Coltrane. And that he played sax. Apparently, I told someone this while playing my toy saxophone in the lobby of an oil change shop. My dad loved telling the story. I have this vivid memory of being out on the balcony at around 8 or 9, cleaning my parakeet Pepper's cage, all the while singing her name to the tune of Milestones. Issues of downbeat always strewn about. I cannot hear weather report without immediately thinking about my dad. My dad also enjoyed watching boxing. He one time fashioned some gloves for me out of several pairs of socks and some rubber bands, and taught me how to throw a punch on the heavy bag on our back patio. He was a Girl Scout dad, baking cookies and taking me to meetings. He got so excited when I started playing piano, and was subsequently disappointed when I didn't continue it. But he was always supportive and proud of me no matter what. My dad says that I was the best thing that ever happened to him, but I was so incredibly fortunate that he came into my life and that he chose to be my father. And this, word has been thrown about a lot tonight, despite his sometimes rough demeanor. He was such a deeply emotional and loving human being. He had a huge heart and a kind soul. He was witty and sarcastic, which was honestly part of his charm. Anyone who was lucky enough to know him knows what a huge loss this is for his family and for the local jazz community. I miss him deeply, and these last few months have been difficult. Thank you to everyone who has taken the time to join us here so that we can remember him and celebrate what he brought in different ways to all of us.
Thank you, Natalie. He's very proud of you. Thank you, Alyssa. Robert's sister Suzanne is here. She came all the way from Italy, and she would like to share some thoughts about her brother with us.
I may not do as good a job as Natalie. I'm already crying. I haven't even started yet. Wow. Haven't seen all those people. So many of you remember Robbie as a jazz writer, a jazz critic, and also a musician. But I will always remember him as a wonderful caregiver to our mom. For several years, he went to her house every morning in time to fix her breakfast, and then he helped her with her physical therapy. Sorry, I can't read it because I'm crying. He also spent hours playing board games with her and helped her learn how to play Words with Friends with me, and also how to do jigsaw puzzles on the computer, which, I'll just say, my mom was like in her 80s at the time. She didn't learn very well. She was very patient, but, well, for Robbie. He then fixed her lunch before leaving for home. He took her to her doctor's appointments and helped her write emails. The love and care he gave to her was appreciated by her and the rest of the family. My brother and I were 8 years apart in age, so there were many years that we weren't close. When he was just a toddler, the rest of us kids called him Pun. I might be remembering that long because it's a long time ago and I'm old. But my dad decided that we couldn't keep calling him that because he was getting ready to start kindergarten. And he put his foot down. So we started calling him Robbie. Although everyone else later on was able to call him Rob, in my mind and in my heart, you will always be Robbie.
I'd like to introduce Robert's brother. Please welcome Mark Bush.
This just isn't fair.
Rob is my younger brother. We selected this photo for a reason, by the way. I don't know if anybody knows sort of the story behind it. As you might imagine, wish I could have $1 for every time somebody would say to me, dude, your brother's intense. It was particularly intense when he went to a concert. And he was very annoyed at people who did not listen and interrupted his listening. And this was his symbol for, I'm trying to listen to Coach Judy. Thank you all for coming, and thanks to all who have contributed so much to the making of this event. And particularly, I want to thank Arlene. She called it her labor of love. But she did confess that she had a weakness for organic dark chocolate. So, Arlene may very well have been the last person to have visited Robert. And on that day, she accomplished two things. She got him to eat a donut, and she got him to smile. And trust me, smiles were hard to come by in those last days. So, again, thank you very much. Arlene, spending most every day with my brother since his diagnosis, I realized how much I did not know about him. I didn't think we had much in common, or so I thought. One of the things we did have in common was our rather dark, irreverent sense of humor. My brother had a wicked sense of humor. That sense of humor was never in more display than on what would be the darkest moment of his life. We were together at UCSD, and we were waiting for the results of CAT scans to tell us, how bad the cancer was, whether it had spread, and all those sorts of things. So ultimately, a young physician came out with her little trolley and her computer, asking all kinds of questions and so forth. But finally, she gave us the results, the worst possible ones, right? Spread, liver, lungs, metastasized, inoperable. So after a little bit more chatting, she said, Robert, do you have any other questions or concerns? To which he replied, yes, the debt ceiling. And I fell apart. I busted out laughing. The poor doctor didn't know quite what to do. Am I supposed to smile? And then later on, he would comment that, although having terminal cancer is a really bad thing, at least he wasn't going to have to sweat over whether his truck was going to pass smog. So the other thing that we had in common was music. I say oddly enough because he, a jazz good dude, and me, a rock and roller. But he shared with me that growing up, whenever I would leave the house,
he would sneak into my bedroom. He knew how to pick the lock. And he did that so he could listen to my albums on this little portable Panasonic turntable that I had. I know we're talking, you know, Steely Dan, Van Morrison, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And I was sort of shocked when he told me that music influenced him even in his journey into the world of jazz. I've heard the term jazz snob tossed about a bit. He was not a jazz snob. His love of music actually spanned many genres. For those of you who may have listened to his podcast, Rabbit Hole Soul, I mean, in addition to all the jazz musicians that he covered, he did a segment on Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, Carlos Santana, Joni Mitchell, Steely Dan. So he had a broad love of music. So, let me leave you with this. In what turned out to be his final article in the San Diego Union, he said, "At some point in the near future, I will be but a memory to those that I leave behind. I hope it's a fond one." Would you all agree with me in saying, Robert, your hope is realized?
Indeed, their hope was realized. Thank you so much, Mark. Appreciate that. We have one more person who'd like to speak today. A very dear friend of Robert, someone who I know Robert had extraordinary respect for, both as a human being and as a musician, as a teacher. He spoke so highly of Mark. So please welcome internationally renowned bass player, improviser, composer, and interdisciplinary collaborator, Mark Dresser.
I met Robert, I believe it was in the parking lot of the San Diego Wine Club. And I was either leaving or coming to a gig, and he cornered me and introduced himself and was telling me that he had heard us play during the Cedar program in the mid-70s. And we didn't know what we were doing. We were just trying to figure out our lives and play music. And he was really moved, and over the years, yes, his intensity and all of those wonderful qualities about him. But I just want to say, and I think that it's clear from everyone who's spoken, and particularly the musicians, we felt like we shared something with him. This kind of, he appreciated the ephemeral. And I've never seen a group of musicians play a benefit for a critic. I've never seen it.
You're so right, you're so
right. You know, that was genuine. You know, we loved him. He loved us. But, you know, that was really, that feeling of when we heard, there was a benefit for him some summer in the Westgate. And then when we found out, then when he had that final diagnosis, because all the musicians were there immediately, bringing them books and just, he was, he really touched us. Anyhow.
Thank you, Mark. A perfect final performance of improvised jazz for a man who definitely knew how to live on the fly. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon as we remember our friend, our father, our brother, our uncle, that guy that had a way with words. You're all invited to join us for a reception here in the courtyard, so feel free to share your own memories of Robert. I would like to mention that funds are being raised to rebuild Robert's website. Basically, will become an archive of his writings and shows. It will not only be a legacy for our friend, but it will definitely be a resource for jazz lovers in the future. So if you would like to contribute to that, there is a GoFundMe. You can get the QR code out here for talking with us. I want to say thank you again to Dan Atkinson and the Athenaeum for providing this space. And thank you very much to Arlene Damasco and to Louis Valenzuela and to everyone who has made this event happen today. On a personal note, I would like to thank you all for being part of Robert's life. And as we have said, that gruff exterior was wrapped around one of the truest hearts I personally have had the privilege to know. I learned a lot about being a person from my friendship with Robert. And I will always appreciate him, and I'll never forget it.